Welcome everyone to our monthly webinar. I'm particularly excited about this one for two reasons. Reason one is because it is a very, very important topic we're talking about. No one would have thought last year around the same time that we would ever talk about things like that, but things have really changed in the last year. So it's a very, very important topic for us. It's also an important one for me personally because it's my first one after maternity leave. And I have told my colleagues multiple times that I'm a little nervous about this one because it's been so long. So two reasons to be really excited about. I will not wait much longer to introduce our panelists today because they are obviously the most important feature we have here today. So I will introduce them to you. We have Emily Berger here. Hi, Emily. Really nice to see you.
Hi, nice to be here. Thanks.
Emily is an educational and developmental psychologist and also a lecturer at Monash University in Victoria. And she will today speak to us about childhood trauma prevention and also the impact of inquiry-based teaching methods on children's health. Mental health, obviously, mainly. So yeah, thank you for coming, Emily. I'm really excited to see and hear what you have to say to us today.
Great, thanks, Heike.
Then we also have Hayley Drennan, who is a kindergarten teacher at Saltwater Childcare Centre in Melbourne. Hi, Hayley, how are you?
Hello, well, thank you, and yourself?
Good, thank you. I already commented on your lovely blouse that you're wearing. I'm very, very jealous of it. It definitely adds a spark.
Thank you.
But what I really like about Hayley is how passionate she is about progressive teaching and inquiry-based learning, and how many great ideas herself and her colleagues had during COVID to keep families and children connected. And so she will talk to us about the strategies that they had to keep everyone connected during COVID. So thanks, Hayley, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And last but not least, we have Emma Burris. Hi, Emma, how are you?
Very good, thanks for having me too.
Emma is, well, she actually has two hats on today, which is very exciting and also probably at the same time very challenging, especially during COVID. Emma is a mom of a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old who are both enrolled at Fribble Parkville in Melbourne. And she's also a neuroscientist. So for her, STEM plays a really important important role in her everyday life. And so she will share with us how the pandemic has impacted her family life and probably also a little bit her work life, and how in cooperation with the center, she could manage to counteract the really probably tremendous effects of isolation in Victoria, particularly. So yeah, thanks everyone for being here. And I will also say hello to all the invisible people out there that are watching us at the moment. We will have a few minutes, probably 5 to 10 minutes at the end for your questions. So you will see at the bottom of your screen a chat function, which you can use to note down your questions. And my colleague Lena, who you'll see in the background here, is going to go through your questions and then make sure that they get to me at the end of the session, just to make sure that we don't miss any of these important questions. Also, before we begin, I wanna introduce you to our educational approach videos. So a couple months ago, we created these videos that give a good entry point into inquiry-based learning. So if after this webinar you feel like you would really like to take a step back and think or look at the basics of inquiry-based learning and the most important elements of inquiry-based learning and co-construction, then please feel free to watch these videos. I'll send you a link in the email that I will send to you after the webinar. And So before we begin, last but not least, I will share my screen with you to go through our objectives. So what we are going to look at today is practices, inquiry-based practices that help create a positive experience to counteract the difficulties for children during COVID-19. We're also gonna look at how we can support parents during COVID-19, or how we could. Hopefully it's mainly in the past. And also how these practices supported children's attachment to educators while still following strict hygiene regulations, or whilst even being in isolation. And also help children find age-appropriate answers to the questions they might have about the pandemic. So that last point, we will see how much time we have to touch on this, but we'll definitely try and cover it. It will probably come up anyway in our conversation. Okay, let's get started. My dear panelists, let's start our conversation with our first question. So what I'm really interested in here first is to find out, how has COVID impacted you? Your family life, your work life, and your life in general.
Would you like me to launch off?
Absolutely, Emily, that would be lovely.
I'll make a start. I can speak in terms of the impacts from a tertiary education setting, so working at Monash University, but also I also have another hat of working as an educational and developmental psychology, as Heike mentioned. I can say from Monash University in the tertiary sector, I have students this year who I've never actually seen face to face. So we very early on, after the first week of classes, very early on went straight into online learning, and for psychology that was very different as well, because we're very hands-on in terms of learning to use tools and techniques and counselling and assessment techniques. So that was a bit of a shift. So it was all online. Meetings have all been online, so we've had second semester online as well. So that's been sort of the experience there. And then in my private practice work as a psychologist, it's been a shift to online. So it was a lot of telehealth, and when we could do face-to-face, it was only when it was absolutely necessary, and there was a lot of regulation around personal protective equipment, so face shields and masks and things. So that's been a bit of an adjustment too, trying to do counselling with little kids particularly, and you're wearing a full face shield and face mask. So that's been challenging and really interesting.
Yeah. Have you felt, Emily, that this that it got easier over time? I mean, did children adapt to this situation fairly quickly?
I think so. It's funny you say that, because I think a lot of our nerves about wearing face shields and masks was probably more reflective of our own nerves. I've found over time, at least my perception is, I haven't necessarily directly asked kids about it, but I found that kids have kind of just adapted to it. There's Emily now, and now when I meet with Emily, there she is in her face shield and her face mask, and all they can see is my eyes. And I think that they have been able to adapt quite well to those changes. I think probably as we've adapted as well, when we first started wearing face masks, for example, I think that was really challenging for a lot of people to get used to the feeling and the sensation.
Mm-hmm. Emma and Haley, maybe we continue there before we go back to the original question. From your experience, how quickly did the children in your life adapt to the situation?
Actually, very organically and very quickly and very naturally, because I think their parents at home were talking about, there's this thing called coronavirus. We need to start washing our hands. You need to sanitize when you get to the centre, and you need to listen to your teacher. And when she explains, you need to, wash your hands an extra 6 times a day. Like, hygiene started to become micromanaged in a way that I've never seen it in early childhood before. And children kind of felt like they had, at my centre anyway, this important job to do. I've just got to go do my sanitising, I'm going to take 20 seconds to do my counting today. It's the length of the entire alphabet song, and they'd really see it through. We tried to turn it into activities as well. We put cellophane in laminated sheets and made fun face shields where they could see the world through a different colour. And, clearly it's not working. However, just getting them to, I guess, feel desensitized to these images of masks and shields, and just developing that language and understanding in their everyday world of how we're physically dealing with coronavirus.
So developing a natural way of dealing with it.
Yeah, a natural language and practice. Yeah, for them and for
fun
us.
to it as well, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Loses it.
Yeah.
Daunting components, maybe. Emma, how about you? How did your children adapt?
Really well. They were really interested because it was something different. They wanted to have face masks themselves, and so that was really interesting from my perspective, because we talked about coronavirus. We made the decision early on that we would talk about what it was and what could happen, and we explained risk, and we explained the age factor. My daughter was so interested. She's 5 and she has a bit of a sponge-like ability with language. So she was learning about T cells and she wanted to draw what the virus looked like. And we incorporated a lot of this talk into our craft at home. And there was a really phenomenal play school episode that really gave us a lot of fun things to do. Our centre actually won an award for their phenomenal work with growing bacteria and microbes, and one of the parents who is a COVID specialist came in and helped them identify what they had grown from the toilet and from different places around the centre. So we were able to see that in progress and do that as well at home. So we really immersed ourselves in what it was, and that helped our children because they had information. My 3-year-old invented a new word, Hanitizer, which we all still use because it's hilarious. My daughter, whenever she chooses to role play mask wearing, because it is actually a game for her, she puts masks on her unicorns. But when she chooses to wear the mask outside, she now knows the Auslan sign for smile, and she likes to know. We did a lot of talking through what does it look like when an adult smiles. You need to now look at their eyes only, and you can tell, and let's have a look and analyze what the eye looks like when someone is smiling or when they're angry. And we've got to be, it's like being a detective. Now we have to use different cues. And so the kids actually thought this whole year was actually really fun. and what a relief for the parents to live through their eyes, actually.
Because so we're right in the middle of it. It's so interesting that right in the first 5 minutes, we're actually seeing how amazingly fast children are able to adapt to these things, and how if the adults in their life use certain practices, a lot of them are inquiry-based or project-based or in some shape or form also co-constructed, how interesting they become and how little scary they actually then are, and how they just become an opportunity for further learning. What I really like, Emma, is the idea with reading emotions through people's eyes. That because this emotional literacy is such an important element. I think it's probably one of the most important things that we can teach our children, and to be able to identify emotions through people's eyes, I think it's incredibly important and beneficial at the end of the day. Okay, so we're actually way ahead of already. So let's take one little step back, because I also want to hear about how it has impacted you, because I can imagine that it's been harder for you than it has been for your children. So maybe, Emily, you already elaborated on that. Is there anything that you would like to add, how it's impacted you?
Not necessarily. I was just sort of thinking about, and I know we'll get to this stage, but I was just thinking about some of the things that Emma and Hayley brought up, and I completely agree that gaining understanding gives children this sense of agency and control. And so I'd like to really pick up on that later, because I that just rang true for me, all the things that they were both saying.
Yeah. Okay, lovely. Emma, would you like to share with us how it has impacted you?
Yeah, this year's been really hard for everyone for so many different reasons. In reflecting on this question, I actually can remember a conversation I had with my partner, who was also a neuroscientist. So we tend to have some nerdy conversations on the couch when the kids have finally gone to bed. And I was using, when we were talking about how COVID was really impacting on us, I used the movie Inside Out as an example. So for those who don't know, Inside Out, I really love it because it gives an insight into the inner workings of the brain. It's a Pixar movie. It's beautifully animated. It follows the story of Riley, who is a young girl who experiences a massive shift in her life when her parents travel across to America, and she leaves everything that she knows behind. And I thought this was a really good analogy for what had happened to us, because everything that we knew was left behind in that really peak period for us in March. I like that it takes the perspective of all her 5 internal characters. So she's got joy, sadness, disgust, and anger and fear, and they sit behind a control panel. They see through the eyes of Riley. Then they can pull levers and shift what she focuses her attention on. And at the core of who Riley is, she has these islands, and these islands make up who she really is as a person. And everything about these levers and these 5 characters, they're trying to protect these islands and build them up. And so that's how we felt that our islands were really integral. But in Riley's circumstance, when she moved, her islands collapsed. Her honesty island collapsed when she started lying to her parents because she was feeling like she didn't have the control. She lost friendships. Her friendship island collapsed. She loved hockey, and her hockey island collapsed. So my partner and I started thinking about, well, what are the islands that we had, and how do we keep them propped up? How can we help our daughter experience swimming lesson islands? I mean, how can she keep that love that she had for swimming if all of that is closed and she can't actually do that? So lots of highlights for us have been her pretending to go on swimming lessons in an esky in our back garden. So she would get her goggles, and we would make these little pools for her in different receptacles around our house, depending on the weather. So that became a real solid foundation for us. And I brought them, I took them off the wall. So this is, you can't see it, but these are our islands. We wrote them down the next day. And our islands were, we chose verb doing words instead. And I can go into this later because I know you want to talk about how do we deal with this. But I really felt like it was almost like a momentous collapse for all of us, because we just didn't have what we used to have to sustain these. So our families were behind state borders for both of us. We lost all of our family. Our ability to work 9 to 5 was really shattered because a 3-year-old at home is almost impossible. He had a limited attention span of about 5 minutes for most activities. Our deadlines didn't pause. So we had all of our grant writing continued, and we were having to write 2 really momentous grants each at a period of time where we had both children at home and there was upheaval. And things were closing, and we were also feeling quite stressed. Our staff were struggling as well. So at the same time as supporting our family, we were supporting young students who didn't have the same foundations as we did. So our pastoral care went up. And our workplaces, because we're both from science workplaces, they were just sources of constant COVID talk. And we had these contingency plans that were just thought of in so many different angles. And that was utterly exhausting for the 2 parents. And all of this ebbed into our home. Our home was our workplace, but it was also our children's playground. It was their place of learning as well. And it was meant to also be our sanctuary. So it was a really difficult thing to put boundaries up around different aspects of our day when we were meant to be working, or when we were the teacher, or when we were just going to be crazy parent. So we had all of these challenges to navigate this space, and also it being winter as well. So winter provided different challenges if it was cold and we couldn't have the same outdoor spaces that we relied on in summer. So it's been the most difficult year, but also a year of extreme learning for all of us. We've learned so much, and I can get into that.
Yes, and I would like to go back to the movie Inside Out. I think it's an excellent example, actually. It's funny that you say that, because I watched this movie again last weekend. What I really, really liked about this movie, and the really strong parallel there, is also that at the end of the movie, um, we understand what the important role of sadness is, because throughout the entire movie, joy is the lead character, and out of the 5 emotions. And we all think at the start, and they want to make you think, obviously, that it's crucially important that all these core memories stay happy memories. And at the end, we realize that when sadness touches a little core memory and it turns half happy and half sad, that this sadness is a beautiful entryway to connection with other people. Because a lot of these memories were happy because she was connected with the people that she loved. And a lot of the times she was connected because she was sad. And I think that's such an important learning, that, a pandemic like this can be a gigantic opportunity for all these things, that we, invite sadness, we invite fear, we invite all these emotions in. But the question is, what do we do with them at the end of the day? Thank you, Emma. That's really great. I will watch it again now and look at it through this lens. Haley, how about you? How has it impacted you and your work life?
It's actually been a real invitation to be as creative as possible. We went from 22 kinder kids down to about 4. Some days there may only be 1 child there. Sometimes there might be 2 or 3. So how do you reach all of those children if you can't see them? That was a real invitation to be creative and really think about the needs of these children, but also the needs of the parents and the families. What realistically can they do to facilitate their child to still have a connection to learning if they are also still trying to work from home and trying to often do the primary school remote teaching for their older siblings? How are they going to put all that together? How can we present ourselves as educators in their space at home without asking too much of them? So that was our really great question to consider. How could we deal with remote learning this year?
Well, tell us then, how did you deal with it?
Okay, we are very lucky. We already have Educa. Educa is like a pre-established online platform that we do our documentation for children. It's kind of like Story Park, kind of like a closed educational Facebook for people who may not have heard of it. So all of your children, they all have a password. They log on, and I can upload photos, videos, text, anything to either one child, a group of children, or all of them. So it's a way that I can speak to all children at once. We found using Educa was unbelievable, because the expectation to get children onto Zoom, they don't necessarily all have access to a computer. Internet connections aren't necessarily the same for everyone. Older siblings are already, using the computer and needing parents to help them. Parents are also working. So Educa, by putting something onto Educa, we would upload videos, whether it's a demonstration of a craft or just reading to them. And then the parents would then show children, here's something you can do, here's a video from Haley and the other educators, and they would be able to filter what they could manage. So on Monday, we would drop 5 videos, and there might be, for example, how to do shadow paintings, ice paintings, map making, animal collages, fitness challenges, cooking demos, tongue twisters, all sorts of things like that. And then if they've got all this to choose from, because, children are interested in different things, so there was a big range of activities, and parents might sift out, they'd show their child one thing a day. Some of them would show them everything on the very first day and be like, give me more. And lots of them may not have checked Educa at all. And that was fine, because we understood everyone has their own challenge and not everyone can perhaps get there. And that was genuinely okay. There was also not an expectation that you have to do this activity and get back to us, but it just gave the invitation to participate if you wanted to. Also, even if we're just sending a video of us, singing a song, reading books, or little sketches and things like that, or science experiments, even if they don't do the activity, they're still connecting to us because they're seeing our faces, they're hearing our voices. And many children, I heard from parents, felt like they had a bit of kinder every single day since their parents were, drip feeding it to them as they needed. Because we were doing things by video, also parents didn't have to sit there. We would be doing a video showing them how to do something. Parents could leave them with whatever resources they may have needed or no resources, and then gone and done their thing. And hopefully we could have entertained them for a short time. So that was very interesting.
And so, Hayley, from your experience, did that often lead to further or like actual experimentation in their homes?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it also invited their siblings, often said, well, I want to do that as well. So then we had not just photos coming back of children doing the activities, but here's what their older sibling has done as well. Here's what, or their younger sibling has done. Here's what mum and dad have done as well. And it became like a family activity in some of those cases. And some of the parents were really able to go, wow, my kid can do heaps of awesome stuff. And I didn't realize that until I got a chance to be the educator.
I remember
I tried to make it not just let's do a craft or let's do an experiment or what have you, but let's bring the regular parts of our program to their living rooms and see what happens. So we usually say an acknowledgement of country every morning. And I had one child that I know who loves to say it. So I got in touch with his mum and said, can you take a video of him saying the acknowledgement of country? And she was like, he will love that. And he did. So then, for example, I would send the acknowledgement of country out to all of the children from that particular child. And then I'd say, who's got it for tomorrow? Then I'd have another child sending in the video of them saying the acknowledgement. So then I'd send out, here's the one for Tuesday from Charlotte. Here's the one from Wednesday from Sunny. And what children loved more than seeing us was being able to see their friends, which was wonderful. Every time I sent something out, I said, send us a pic of how you got on at home. And every time they sent pictures, I compiled them. And on Friday, at the end of the week, my weekly reflection, instead of being a weekly reflection for me, would normally be at Kinder, this is what we've been up to this week. It was, this is what we've been up to at home. And it was sending photos of all the children doing the same arts and activities, looking different in different living rooms. And parents often reported to me that was their favourite one to get, the ones where they saw all of their friends as well as themselves being celebrated for the work that they had done.
So there's still some sort of peer group learning and connection to your peers.
That's it.
Participation. And there's also great examples of parent involvement in there. So we will bring it all together at the end or towards the end to have some clear hands-on strategies on also how to hopefully maintain these positive things that came out of this. What I would like to do, just in terms of the order, maybe let's talk to Emily first about trauma and trauma prevention. Then, Emma, if you could elaborate a bit more on how you dealt with these effects. And then, Hayley, I would like to watch the video that you provided for us just to give us a bit of an example of what you did. Okay, Emily, what is trauma? And maybe you can do that pretty briefly and then spend a little bit more time talking about trauma prevention.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it links in, as I said, I think it links in really well with all of the things we've been speaking about. Probably the most important thing, in terms of trauma can be trauma, adversity, they're common terms that are used. It can be anything that happens, it can be things such as, exposure to family violence, exposure to disasters. It can be exposure to other forms of adversity in your life where the event sort of outweighs your psychological resources to be able to cope with the situation. I think what's really clear through the trauma literature and adversity literature, particularly with children, is that there's a group of kids who are adversely impacted by these sorts of traumatic experiences, in the home or outside of the home. There's a group of children who aren't necessarily affected at all. Life just seems to continue on as per usual. And then there's a group of kids who I think has been the focus of our discussion around kids who actually show what we call growth, post-traumatic growth, flourishing, resilience after a trauma. So there's various, risk factors, which I won't necessarily go into now. There's various risk factors for those who will have an adverse reaction compared to no reaction, or compared to a post-traumatic reaction, a post-traumatic growth reaction. But in terms of that post-traumatic growth reaction and resilience, it's all the things that have been discussed. So connectedness and social support's very, very, very important. Kids to have an opportunity to show their agency. I really liked what Hayley said around how kids and parents have actually learned what they can do and how they can cope. So what we find with appropriate scaffolding, with appropriate advice, similar to what Emma was raising in terms of supporting kids in an age-appropriate way to understand what's happening and giving them the facts. Quite often we find that kids have adverse reactions to these sorts of experiences because they make up in their own head what's happening. And so they form their own beliefs, and they're often not accurate beliefs. Obviously, they're children. We've all had really scary thoughts about the pandemic. Kids also do, and kids can't necessarily situate the level of risk that they face, whereas we as adults have more, obviously, more of an ability to situate ourselves and recognise perhaps that we're not in as much danger. Kids will tend to inflate the level of danger. So for us as parents and educators and psychologists, our role is really to give a hopeful message, give kids a sense of agency and control. If we think about when we face something anxiety provoking, we as adults, we want to control the situation. So as much as possible, we try to give a sense of control to kids, that they can control certain situations with support from their parents. They can make decisions with the family in terms of, washing hands. I like the example that Hayley gave, that kids will actually show that they're really socially conscious as well. So we've definitely found that as well, that kids are really socially conscious. They want to help, but they just need our advice and our guidance to be able to know how to help. And as I said before, around the negative cognitions, for me, and particularly my work as a psychologist, but I encourage this of families, I encourage this of educators as well, is to really be curious about how your kids are thinking and feeling about the pandemic. So really be curious, open it up as a conversation, a continued conversation. Know that anxiety thoughts and positive thoughts come and go, and that our thoughts are really powerful in terms of dictating how we feel and how we behave. And so if we can understand how they're thinking about the pandemic, how they're thinking about people wearing face masks, how they're thinking about having to wash their hands, we can obviously understand if they have any unhelpful cognitions and unhelpful thoughts or negative thoughts or inaccurate thoughts. Maybe they're catastrophizing about the event. And then we as adults can obviously challenge those thoughts, and we can give a more hopeful message that that things are going really well, and these are the things that we as a family, and things that we can do to help to control the spread and take care of our health and take care of the health of other people.
Thank you, Emily. I think we have already heard some really good strategies here, and I would like to add a book recommendation actually that just came to my mind listening to you. It's a book called The Whole Brain Child. One of the authors is Daniel Siegel, and I'll also add that to your email, everyone, the post-webinar email. In this book, the author talks about strategies to help children regulate their emotions. So it's basically talking about connecting the emotional and the cognitive side of a child's brain. And we all know that the emotional side is very dominant in children, and I would say it's probably dominant in all of us. And it gives very hands-on strategies on how to bring these two sides of the brain together. And a big part of it is for children to be able to verbalize their emotions, and for us as adults to switch on our emotional side, to connect with a child when they are feeling fear or anger or any other adverse emotion. And so I can really recommend this book. It's called The Whole Brain Child. But again, it will be in your resources. Thank you, Emily. Emma, you've already touched on some of the strategies. Would you like to continue? What have you done to really counteract these negative effects of COVID?
If I could first just give yet another book
Please.
recommendation. It's called Hey Warrior, and it's a kid's book about anxiety. And being a neuroscientist, I often use the words that I'm familiar with to help describe bits of the brain. So this one is actually a personification of the amygdala, which is an area of our brains that coordinate mood and in particular anxiety. It's a simplistic take on it, but my daughter has loved to see this little tiny creature that lives inside her brain that can react sometimes, and it's very kind. This book doesn't treat this creature as anything negative. It's actually about, how do you be kind to your amygdala and when do you listen to it? So it's been very useful for my daughter because she's quite cerebral and she thinks a lot, and that's one of the reasons why we delved a bit more into what coronavirus looked like and what a vaccine would look like and how it would work, because she really led that. She had too many questions, although there's never such a thing as too many questions, really. I think it's amazing to be a parent.
Too many questions for one day, maybe.
Yeah. So a little bit about the island. So I'll just hold this up again. We made this together. The kids did the painting and I helped them write it. So we specifically chose words that were doing words. So the kids understood how we can act them out. The words that we chose were based on our collective values. So we're all different people and we're all living in the same house. How do we really fill each person's island and sustain each person's island at the same time? There's a lot that happens in a day with little people and with full-time work for two people in the same house. I also have a stepson who's 10 and he was joining us every weekend as well. So our house was in constant flux with this additional sort of person in our family. And then we had to cater activities from age 3, 5 and 10. And so that's a really tricky thing, I think, for anybody, let alone someone who isn't actually a trained educator. So there were definitely days when we had an activity that fit one of our islands and it was a flop because my 3-year-old would come in and just destroy it in one swoop with his chaos. Or my 10-year-old actually was the only one who was interested in it and the other two just wanted to watch a movie. So getting back to what we chose exercise. We chose create, crazy, care, and calm. And so our kids would go, after we had breakfast, we would go and check our list and we would think about what we wanted to do first. And then we would come up with a solution for how to fill that bucket or how to sustain that island. So for exercise, one of the things we chose often was actually to go to the local creek. We live quite close to Edgar's Creek and we spent almost every day we could there. And we have a Kelpie. The Kelpie also had the exercise island. We had to think of her too. So we would often go there and we would observe just how things were changing with the seasons. We would observe the water flow when we had big rains. We would get completely covered in mud. It became our outdoor area and we could sometimes tick off a number of those things on our islands. We would create. So we would build and practice our engineering skills by building bush cubbies, or we would build boats and test them and see which ones sunk down the river. It was a really important classroom for us. It was also a really great way to get the mess out of the house. There is unbelievable amounts of mess when you have children with you the whole time. My children have always been very, very chaotic with their learning and with their creativity, and I love that. It's been something that's important to me, but it does mean that there's just mess from Christmas to breakfast. It was so stressful for us to still maintain this level of, hygiene in our house. So the outdoor spaces were really important to us because we could tick off the exercise and the crazy there. Other things about care really taught our children the value of looking after our community, and that was also about, I loved what you said, Emily, about giving agency to the children, and also Hayley. So we wanted to show them that this is one way that they could help. We talked about the first responders, so we talked about the people that had to work, but that mum and dad were not working, but this was our way of working. We could give beautiful, craft projects. I had too many craft projects, so I loved giving them away. We'd send them in express post packets to our friends. We would send them next door to our next door nana, and she would give us all of the cooking she would normally give to her 27 grandchildren. She would constantly be delivering us fresh bread that was still warm. So we had this really intense connectedness with our community, because my kids were these little workers out there delivering letters. So we would handwrite letters and get out onto our street and deliver them to random people in our street. And we made excess Play-Doh, and we worked out which kids lived on our street and who we needed to drop that Play-Doh off. So the care one was really important, and we most certainly ticked that one every day. I think this became a foundation for us, because when you are absolutely at capacity, having to come up with activities for kids, like that feeling of, oh my gosh, what are we going to do today? It was such an overwhelming feeling. So when we had this foundation up on the wall, we had a structure for our day, but it had such flexibility that our children got to choose what they wanted to do in this foundation. So we also tried to replicate what happened at kinder with the meal times and with the rest time, to give them that sense of safety. They had the boundaries in their day of what was going on, but they could choose if they took their morning tea to the bush, so we could eat it in our bush cubby, and they loved that. We did a lot of other things that sort of came into STEM-based learning, which I can go into at another time, but I just wanted to share pretty much the number one highlight of my partner and I of the most extreme period of lockdown was when we would role play horses. So my partner and I would pretend to be horses, and my children then had to contain us. And my partner had a personality of the most obstinate, really annoying horse. He would just walk off and he would destroy things in the house. It was really shocking to my children because he was so in the character of this horse. I was a compliant horse, so I was often the one, if one of my children were tired, they would pick me as the horse, as the owner of the horse. And they would take us around the house. They would give us carrots, pretend carrots, and my 3-year-old would go up to my partner and pat him and say, "Good girl, good girl." They would make us beds. This role play got us through a lot of really, really tiring evenings where they need stimulation. Kinder gives them so much. Their friends, the constant activities. We just couldn't replicate that because there's too much mess. There's only one of us because the other person was always working. So that horse game really gave us a way to get them from dinner to the bath to bedtime. It was a great routine that we used to bring out. It was a little bit like a Bluey episode. I think Bluey is a really ultimate parental guide as to how you could be a parent. I mean, it's not possible every night because you are tired, but there was some level of, I think we liked the horses too because we could often lie down and just pretend to be asleep for ages. So I think any game for a parent that involves you actually getting to lie down for just a brief period of time is a really good one. So we found really creative ways to tick these island boxes, but it was really critical that we knew that every person in the family had different ways. So for exercise, my daughter loved doing cosmic yoga, and she loved that interaction with this person on YouTube. She loved the narrative. She loved the movement. But my 3-year-old just needed to go out and jump on the trampoline and go chaotic and race around on his little motorbike. My partner and I needed to actually have proper exercise. So we sanctioned time in our day to look after every person in the family. And that got us through. It was really prioritizing everybody, especially the parents. We were really we were martyrs with our parenting prior to COVID, but ensuring that the parents are a good team and knowing that they're on, that we were communicating well was actually absolutely critical during this time. And so we did a lot of self-care things for the parents. We had date nights, and we ensured that we got the exercise and the peace and calm that we needed to be good parents when we showed up to parenting.
Thanks, Emma. Oh, there's so much in there.
Sorry, I should stop talking.
No, that's okay. I am conscious of the time. Can you believe we only have 15 minutes left? But that's absolutely fine. There were so many important things in there. So what I have decided is I would like to share my screen with you again and show you the core messages or the key messages of our educational approach, because they're so in line with what we just heard. So inquiry-based learning has obviously a lot in it, but the most important messages are kindle your own curiosity. I think we've heard that. Although it was extremely challenging, Emma and her partner, and also Haley and her colleagues, we'll see that in a bit, had the opportunity to really be creative and curious themselves and find ways to, let out their own curiosity, but maybe potentially even also their own tension and all the other things that were there. And you mentioned that, Emma, being yourself, being able to give yourself permission to take care of yourself as well, to acknowledge your own islands, to just be your authentic, genuine self. I think this is very important and is a very important element of inquiry-based learning. Because if we're not curious ourselves, if we are not happy and real ourselves, our children won't be able to learn. Explain less and inquire more. I don't think I have to say anything about that. There's a lot in there. I guess you gave your children a lot of, freedom, Emma, to decide what they wanted to do, also with the necessary guidance that they need at this age. Like you said, you had a routine, a daily routine that children really need. But there was also lots of freedom for them to decide what they wanted to do according to their mood, their personality, the time of day, and so on. Mm-hmm. Let children lead the exploration. That certainly happened there as well. And also we're going to talk about this with you, Haley, in a bit as well, with the videos that you guys sent. Connect with the children's prior knowledge. We didn't really talk about that, but a lot of it is in there, that, over the course of the whole lockdown, I'm sure you got to observe a lot of the prior knowledge that the children have and could build upon that. Maybe we have a little bit more time to talk about this later. I'm sure you have all a lot to say about that. I just don't want to get into it right now because we have so many other things to cover. And create an environment with various learning opportunities. So this is a really important one, because when we talk about a co-constructed environment, we always picture a face-to-face environment, but that wasn't possible. So we have already heard how many ways you found to still keep everyone connected. And let's watch this video now that Haley has provided, and then we can afterwards talk about how is inquiry-based learning, where we actually supposed to explain less and inquire more, possible when the prompt comes directly from the educator. And Haley's video is a good example for that. So let's jump into this.
Pete! Oh, are you okay? Lucia, what are you doing to Pete?
I tried to make Pete fly.
Fly?
Yeah.
That's not going to work, Lucia.
Do you have any idea I can do?
You need a catapult.
What is catapult?
What's a catapult?
What's catapult?
Here's my catapult that I made. You need a base. A simple block will do. You also need a spacer. You could use a pencil, crayon, a texter, even a chopstick. A lever. Plastic spoon is good because plastic is bendy. Then you just need some rubber bands to attach it all together. Now you just put them all together. You put the spacer on the base with the rubber band, and then you put the lever on the spacer. So the lever on the spacer and the spacer on the base. Pretty easy. You might need to get mum and dad to help you with this. And if they're working, that's okay. We have plenty more at Saltwater for when you get back. Ta-da! Now you need a projectile. I use tin foil. I make a small ball with it, so then I can use to make things fly. I definitely wouldn't use a marble or a small ball because they're too heavy. They could cause an accident. Wow! Ready to go.
Haley, tell us more about it, in particular, answering the question that I brought up earlier. How is this inquiry-based learning? Why is this still inquiry-based?
Well, inquiry-based learning is such a huge term. Did you want to give me a 10-second description of what you mean by inquiry-based in this context?
Of course. So I think the most important element of inquiry-based learning for us is that it's child-led, so that there still is the flexibility provided that children can follow a prompt if they wish to, and how they want to.
Great. So this is pretty open-ended. It's basically, this is how you make it. And then I'd say, send us a photo of what happens. So we had families showing catapults that they'd made out of things like huge spoons, like this big, and their catapults were huge balls, or you'd have people making teeny tiny ones, and they'd say, hey, guess what we discovered? This went this far, this went this far. We were able to measure this distance. You had some children using teddy bears as the projectiles. You had all sorts of results, and that was the important thing, that you sort of plant the seed and then you see what happens.
Yeah, amazing. Now, we have 6 minutes left. So what I would like to do before we do look into our Q&A is to bring all the different threads together and have some hands-on strategies for our audience to walk away with. Emily, maybe you can give us a bit more insight, considering what we just talked about, some very hands-on coping strategies or strategies for educators and parents to deal with these situations.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, from all of this discussion, it's about looking for opportunity for learning and how we define learning as well. I think it's important that we challenge ourselves. How do we define learning and what learning looks like? How do we define coping and what coping looks like? To really model. So what I really like to see from educators and from parents and the people I work with is, to model when we're feeling sad, and that's okay, or to model that we're feeling two different emotions at the same time, or to model that we're missing people, and then to model for the kids not only articulating and calling it out and naming the feeling and the emotion and how it feels in our body, inside our body. It gives me butterflies in my tummy, makes my heart beat faster, for example. Calling it out, calling out the emotion, how it feels, physically as well, but then also calling out and actually naming what I'm going to do about it. So I'm going to actually go and do some colouring because I know that colouring makes me feel better when I'm feeling nervous or I'm feeling afraid. So as much as possible, we want to increase the emotion literacy of kids. And so for parents and for educators, it really is about them articulating their own emotions and encouraging open dialogue about emotions, how emotions feel within our body, because that helps children to connect in with the feelings. Sometimes it's hard for them to identify anxiety, but they definitely identify the butterflies in their tummy. They definitely identify their heart beating faster. Once they know about the emotion, then we can start to think about cognitions and thoughts depending on the age of kids, and we can start to inquire about what sort of thoughts, what do you think about all of the different aspects of the pandemic, the virus itself, but the aspects of wearing masks and washing our hands and restrictions and all those sorts of things. And I guess as well, modelling as well can be used in terms of, and this idea of inquiry-based learning can be used where parents and educators can model that they don't have the answers necessarily, but they can give scaffolding to kids so kids can find the answers to a particular topic that they're interested in. And I would say that we do need to as well, you mentioned as well, connecting with prior learning. I would say we do need to, as kids return back to school and centres, need to continue to have conversations with kids and ask kids, what have you actually learned? So again, not this idea of learning of you learn to write your name or you learn to read. They're important lessons, but there's also other lessons that we've learned as well. So what have we learned about ourselves? And again, parents can model that as well for their kids. What have we learned about ourselves, about the world, and what are we still curious about?
A lot of these things are actually parts of our workshops. I'm just reminded, for example, the last thing you said about reflecting with children about their experiences. We have in our AIR workshop, we talk about metacognition, so the ability to think about your own thinking and reflect on your own learning. And we do give educators strategies on how to connect children to their own experiences, and also for us to understand where the children are at, because that's extremely important. When I talked about the key messages, understanding where the children are, and what the children already know, and what interests the children gives us opportunities, or opens up opportunities for us to facilitate more interesting, or the learning that really sticks, the information that really sticks. Emma, I have one more question for you, if you don't mind. How has Froebel Parkwell supported you? And it has to be, unfortunately, a bit of a shorter answer because we're coming to the end. But
I've mentioned a few things already that they have provided us with daily and weekly sort of projects, and show and tell as well. It was really important for my daughter Ada in particular to see her friends. We had an unusual experience in that we were one of the first childcare centres to be closed down due to a positive case. And so really early on, we all experienced this sort of collective trauma ourselves, and this really brought us close together. And I just wanted to shout out to the community. They are our family, and we were so shocked by how important our other friends and family were in our lives that we weren't allowed to see, and our Froebel family became that part of that island for us. And we shared special holidays with them, so we celebrated their culturally significant holidays, and they celebrated our children's birthdays with us, and we celebrated theirs. And a testament to the closeness we have is that my daughter actually calls me Zoe sometimes, because that's the level of closeness she has to this special teacher. And a massive shout out to just the care that they have put into the messaging. And I noticed this with yours too, Hayley, in the video. You really provide that flexibility to the parents and the sensitivity to just acknowledging how hard it is, and giving the children that flexibility and in choosing, you can just watch this and experience it this way if your parent's not around. And that's a level of care that they brought in to all of their practice as well.
So I think, we've all been talking internationally, we've been talking about the effects of COVID and the positive effects of COVID. And I think it shows again here that the real opportunity here is to become and be more connected with each other in this pandemic, but also hopefully afterwards. And how beneficial it is for our children if we're, as educators and as parents, work together to have the children's mental health and learning in mind, and also on a very personal level, how it helps us to get through these challenging times and just make life a lot better in general if we have that. I just heard from Lena that we have actually covered all the questions that came in. So we did have a few questions, but we could actually answer them throughout the webinar, which is actually really good. The one thing I would like to finish off with is just the other day I listened to a podcast, and there are also parts of it talking about COVID. And one of the interview guests shared the Chinese word for crisis. It consists of two parts, two letters, and one of them represents danger, and the other one represents opportunity. So a crisis is danger plus opportunity. And I think that's absolutely nails it on the head where we're currently at. So we have a lot of opportunity here to make a difference. Thank you so much, everyone. I really enjoyed this. I could keep talking for ages with you. There's so much more to cover. But it was really excellent. Thank you so much.